Everyone hear me all right? Good. We're starting off right. So I'm Corey. I own Aquarium Co-op. I love puffers and I love guppies. Tonight we're going to talk about puffers, and there's going to be guppies in there because somehow I always manage to fit that in somewhere. But as you heard Kathy say, this right here is Hank, or was Hank, I should say. You'll hear all about him. And that is a true freshwater puffer. This species, the Mubu puffer, gets roughly 30 inches, maybe up to 36 in captivity. Very big species, but there's the whole gamut from the pea puffer, the dwarf puffer you might know, and all the ones in between, which mostly no one knows. So people usually know saltwater puffers and pea puffers, and everything else they assume just has to be brackish or saltwater or something like that. So we'll talk about some other things that you guys can actually keep in your home aquariums. I know there's a few puffer people here in the audience because I've seen you, I've talked with you, that type of thing. And I always like to start my talk out by saying, support your local club. We're lucky here to have a pretty robust club. I've spoken at quite a few clubs now, and I'll get emails and stuff like that where their club doesn't have a BAP program, they don't have a HAP program, things like that. So I would encourage all of you, if you're even semi-interested in participating, start participating. It's not something like a gym membership where, I signed up and now I never go and now I regret it every day. You can totally sign up, do a bunch this month, not touch it again for 8 months, and then participate again next year. So it's not a huge commitment. And then if you are staying committed, think about joining the board or taking a position from someone, because a lot of the people we've had making everything run, like I've been in the club for about 10 years, and I think Eric's been doing AV, you've had everyone else here, mostly except for the president, here about 10 years. So getting a break is the best way to make sure they do it forever. So even if they take a year or two off, they miss it, and so then they come back and do it for another 10-year stint. But it can wear on people, and I say that out of experience. I used to be the BAP coordinator when I opened up my store. It was kind of a conflict of interest to be on the board of directors and make decisions as a club that could benefit my store and stuff like that, so I stepped down, but I still try and weigh in and listen to things on any matters that I think will actually help grow this hobby, which clubs are the best way to be doing that. As everything moves online, it's a miracle that we can get this many people to sit in a room together, and not everyone's on a phone. That's an amazing thing. So, that should be something special with your family. You make everyone get off their phone, they come and they watch fish. Even if you don't like fish, you like sitting next to someone else. And it's nice to have human interaction every once in a while. So please support your club. All right, let's get started. So today, my talk will not be crazy technical. It will not be filled with maps. It will not be filled with water parameters. We'll talk a little bit about it, but I don't know that you need 30 minutes on one puffer you're never going to keep anyway, and their little idiosyncrasies on water parameters and stuff, more that you would go, hey, what's a puffer I could actually go buy and I might want to keep, and why is that one going to eat my dog? Things like that. So, I try to keep it. I'm a hobbyist, and I like to think all of you are hobbyists. I mean, there's always some academics in the audience, and they go, it could have been a little more technical. It totally could, but I think I would have served, 2 people in the audience versus hopefully serving most of you. So the first question you always get is, do puffers actually puff up? And the answer is yes. This is Hank. Hank was my first large puffer I ever got. And this was probably around 8 years ago at this point. And I got this picture, and I was crazy lucky to get it. Let me explain why. One, they almost never puff up. It's the same as capturing a family member fainting during the act. It's that quick, and you'd have to be ready. You'd almost have to go, I think they might faint today. Let me just sit with a camera. And so to get this shot, I actually have my computer to the right-hand side of it with a dedicated camera that always sat there, knowing one day, because I had seen it happen once before, and it was like 2 years to see it happen, but they basically inflate, and then they deflate. And the reason he was doing that was they have to exercise that muscle. Now, it's also their defense mechanism when, let's say, a river otter grabs a hold of you. The only way to get those jaws to open up is to become a basketball. And so that's what it's actually used for, but so rarely will you get to see it. They do puff up. And it can be deadly if they do it out of water. So if you're ever buying a puffer from a store or something like that, ask them that the puffer stays underwater the whole time. So that means if they're going to use a net, they corral that into, let's say, this water cup. If it's a little baby puffer, you get it into there, then you pour it into the bag. because if they inhale and they bring in a lot of air, it's then our job to get it back out of their system. And that's a pretty violent thing, because if they don't get it all out, you have to basically grab that puffer, you hold it vertically, so his mouth is up, and you shake him. And you're trying to burp it, essentially. And if you don't get it out, it's usually fatal. So, you want to avoid that thing. And so much so, when we moved Hank to the store originally, he was about this big or so. And this is an acrylic tank. The portholes on an acrylic tank, the reason he had to move was he was going to get bigger than the holes were in the tank. So I had to go and I went and bought a trash can, like a little waste basket you'd have in your office. And you get that in there and you corral him in, and then you lift, and you learn a lot of things. Like when he was lifting him out, he started thrashing around. I realized, wait a second, his head's right next to my knuckles. And we'll talk about why that's really dangerous. They're puffer bites. So I had to put him back in, corral him, get him to go head first, which a giant, really smart puffer with really good vision doesn't want to go into a black hole face first. So that's a whole thing in itself. But we eventually got him out there, and we got him to the store. And so yes, puffers do puff up. It's not always a bad thing. They could just be exercising their muscle. You'll rarely get to see it. It'll be more of a treat. And whenever someone wants to see it, just realize it'd be very traumatic for it to happen if you were to make it happen. I would have to shock you so much you faint, and you probably wouldn't want to do that just for fun at that point. So the most common one I think you're ever going to see at a store, besides brackish water, which we're only talking about freshwater puffers here today, would be the pea puffer, the dwarf Indian puffer, the dwarf puffer. They get a lot of names. Anything that's going to sell one, that's what they're going to call it. So if someone says, "Is that a princess puffer?" Depends. Are you buying it? Then yes, it is. So they get a lot of names, and you watch people bicker online, going, "Oh, this one's this one, this one. My store calls it this." If they only get about this big, it's a dwarf puffer or a pea puffer, whatever you want to call it, and the other person knows what you're talking about, you've hit the nail on the head. These guys are great because they only get to about the size of a nickel. So if you took out a nickel and you look at it, nice and round. The problem is they've got a ferocious attitude, or can have that. So even though they're so small, they love to bite on stuff. So it might be like a Chihuahua. It's got that bigger dog syndrome. It doesn't care that you're 5 times as big, and it's still got wicked sharp teeth. The good thing about the pea puffer is that they don't have teeth that grow at an accelerated rate. We'll learn about other puffers where they're like beavers or rabbits, where if we don't file down their teeth all the time, it's going to be a problem. These guys don't have that so much. There's lots of bickering and debating that will go online about whether they're going to grow too fast or not. In my experience of selling thousands and thousands and thousands of pea puffers at this point, I've yet to ever seen one have a teeth problem. So it might be one of those things that, yes, there is someone on the planet that has one with overgrown teeth. I've never seen it personally, so I think we're worrying about a corner case that doesn't exist. These guys, they're really easy. All you got to do is feed them like frozen bloodworms, frozen brine shrimp. The problem is they won't take to dry foods, so if you just plop them in your tank, you try to give them some flake food or something like that, they're not going to eat. They're a hardcore carnivore like all puffers are. They want meat. They want shelled things. They will definitely eat shrimp and snails. They will definitely not eat them if you have them in a store as well, just to defy me. I've had like this ninja mono shrimp living in the pea puffer tank for about 1.5 years, and everyone goes, "Well, you're doing it." And it's like, yes, it is technically happening, but I would not say that's the norm. I always bring up the story on, when you're on Facebook and then you see that bird that's riding around a cat. That's not normal. That's not how everyone's cats and birds interact. That just happens to be that relationship going on here. Because they love to say, "Well, you're doing it." Well, yeah, I could catch them out, but it's like, it's nature. It's doing it. Why not just let it happen? If it's not broke, I'm not going to fix it. But these are a great one to start. 10-gallon tank. You keep one roughly every 3 to 5 gallons. And I like them in either 1 or 3 or more. That pair that everyone's trying to get, they want 2 of everything and everything's going to live nice. Usually you're going to get either 2 males, or you're going to get 2 females that are fighting because they want spawning territory, or you'll get a male and a female. Perfect, except the male never leaves the female alone. There's so many scenarios that don't work out that well that I prefer a solo specimen or a group. And the problem with sexing, you can't really do it till they're adult, and you're never going to be able to get them at a store as adults. So you kind of got to buy a group, knowing when they start getting big enough, I could start sexing them, and I might remove some. So maybe you buy 5, you grow them up for 8, 10 months, and then you go, "Hey, I found the perfect group of 3, a boy and 2 girls, let's say, or whatever group you want to keep." and rehome the other ones back to the store or a friend or whatever. I mean, your whole family will be in love with pea puffers at this point, so they'll find a home. But the smallest one, I would say, 5-gallon tank, 1 solo specimen on your desk at work. You'll have more friends than you ever knew you had at work because it's a puffer, right? You're magical. So when it comes to food, these are all the basic things that I think a lot of people can do well with. They're great at eating snails. You know, if you got a snail problem, they'll make short work. You'll probably have a snail problem for a day or two. They'll eat about 5 of them, and they'll go, wow, I'm so full. Now my job is to kill the rest. I don't need to eat them. I just need to kill them because they need to not live. So a lot of people get these puffers and they go, well, I have so many snails, it'll never go hungry. The problem is it goes on a rampage, and then a week later you're back to having a problem. So know that the food is pretty much the trickiest part of puffers, and they need to file their teeth down, and things with shells do that. So like we've got ram's horn snails here, Malaysian trumpet snails. The internet would have you believe that's like the #1 teeth killer on puffers. At the store, my employees, everyone I know, we've fed, I don't even know, tens of thousands of them. We've never noticed a chipped tooth or anything like that on any of the puffers we've ever done. I think it's a corner case thing, and puffers are adorable, and we love to be fanatical about them. So we go, well, I would never feed mine one of those again because I had one bad experience. Same thing, there's allergies. One guy choked on a cucumber, so cucumbers kill humans. Let's put it back into perspective of, on a big sample, I've never had a problem, and I've never met anyone to have a real problem with that yet. The best thing we could do is the self-cloning crayfish. Unfortunately, they're not legal here. So they clone themselves. They got plenty of shell. You can have them in every size. They'll eat in the aquarium until they're eaten. It's a perfect match made in heaven for not every state, but most states except for Washington, unfortunately. And then you've got the easy one, bloodworms. Every puffer pretty much wants to devour all the bloodworms you're ever going to get it, and it's super easy. It's like feeding your dog treats. He'll eat as many as I give him. The problem is that leads to be a problem, and they don't want to eat their normal food. Same thing goes on here. You feed them bloodworms 6 times a week, and then you try to get him to eat that clam, let's say, on the half shell. He doesn't want it. He wants his candy. And so you got to always be working to feed them things with shells and not get dependent on things that don't have shells, because if you can really see your puffer's teeth with their mouth being closed, so to speak, then they're too long. Usually teeth will be so filed down that you just see lips. And that's mostly what we see here, right? We see a snail and we see some lips, but we don't see teeth. When you go and you hop on YouTube after this and you start looking at all the cool puffers, you're going to see a lot of big teeth. Usually they're not getting enough shelled foods. I recommend bare minimum 4 times a week. Now that can be a big food bill if it's a big one. If it's a small guy like this, maybe that's not so bad. But when they're really small, like this guy, the spotted Congo puffer, he won't really eat clams on the half shell. So that means you have to have a supply of snails. And that is easy for 6 months. And then you're like, well, my local store's kind of running out. My friends are running out. And so you almost got to make a dedicated tank to, I'm going to breed snails, or I'm going to buy them off the internet, or I saw right over there's a big old bag of Malaysian trumpet snails I got my eye on even, because they're just good times. And unless you happen to own a store like me and people will bring you snails to feed the puffer, it can be hard. So just know that that's the crux, is enough snails or shelled foods depending on the puffer. So this one here is the Amazon puffer. I was having great conversation with Dean the last week. He actually saw them in the Amazon, which is super cool. These ones are pretty much ideal, in my opinion, for most people. They only get about 4 inches, and they're considered to be community safe. So that means your tetras, your rasboras, all the things you normally keep, they'll cohabitate with in general. And they want to be in groups, so you can keep like 5 or 6 of them, maybe in your 55 or 75-gallon tank. They'll be super cool. And they just motor around with their little fins. And yep, they do eat snails. They will eat things like freeze-dried krill. We actually had an employee that had one that would trim his own teeth. He'd go to the rocks and just trim them down. So he was super smart, which was helpful. But if you have an army of 7 of these things, that's 7 snail-eating fish you got to provide for. And that, again, we're back to the crux of that. Luckily, they love planted tanks just like the dwarf puffer. A lot of the puffers do well with planted tanks, which we do well with. A lot of times when I'm speaking in other parts of the country, they just ask what plants are, But they actually love plants, and they do well with them, which is good. And you can keep a snail-free tank that way. And if you're selling plants, that's kind of, you can go, well, I got an army of puffers. Nothing out here makes it alive. But you can always climb online, find more information, learn about them. The problem with these guys, they're a little bit spendy. You can get them as cheap as maybe $15. At my store, they're about $30. And we'll talk about the quarantine procedures and the parasites and stuff that go along with puffers. And so we have to sit on our puffers quite a long time to get them to the point where they're really ready for a home. If that process hasn't been done, $15 or something like that makes a lot more sense. But there can be a mortality rate and stuff like that. So I personally would rather, if I was adopting a dog, adopt one that's already had its shots and done well than, buying a blank slate. But everyone can make their own choice. So when it comes to decor for puffers, I break them into 2 or 3 groups, really. But these 2 pictures show 2 different setups. One, this is an employees. We have some wood, we have some vallisneria, we've got sand, and we've got some bulbitis here. And that is great for your pea puffers, your Amazon puffers, your spotted Congo puffers, all the ones we talked about, really so far. They're smaller puffers. They only get 3-4 inches, and that's only a 25-gallon tank. And those puffers don't zip across the room at the blink of an eye. They kind of, they move, and they're not going to get hurt. Where you take something like this is Murphy here, so my second, the late Hank, Murphy. He's about 14 inches or so, and he's got this giant tail fin on him that he almost never puts out. But if he does, one little swipe of that, and he'll dart 6-8 feet across in under a second. And so when you have sticks, and you have a puffer, and then something spooks it, like the TV flashed, or a kid hit the tank, or there's a sound outside, it's going to get spooked and run, and it can gouge itself. It's common for them to get big gouges in their skin or take out an eye or something like that. So with that in mind, when you start playing with the bigger ones, the Maboos, the Fahaka puffers, we try to take away the things where they can gouge their eye out. So avoid sticks, but over here we've got lots of smooth rocks. We've got Texas Holy Rock, lots of plants, all live plants here. And we've got sand. So sand is in both of these. Some puffers really like to burrow. Now, mine have never liked to burrow. My Maboos, some people say they love it. Same with Fahaka puffers. I think it comes down to the way they're being kept. I think in a stressful environment or something that's spooking them, they like to burrow and be more of an ambush predator. I think, like at the store, they get desensitized to kids making funny faces at them 100 times a day, and so they don't hide as much. When they were young, they definitely hid more, and as they grow, they get more confident, and I think it's a desensitizing thing that eventually makes it happen. But I still recommend sands because some of the next puffers we'll see are actually kind of ambush predators, and they really want to be ambushing stuff. But live plants makes it easier. When these fish go to the bathroom, especially this big guy, it's kind of like a chihuahua went to the bathroom, and something's got to digest it, I choose plants. We don't really have to gravel vac because these guys, at least this guy, if we put snails in, he will sift through the sand to find snails, and so they're constantly blowing in it. A lot of the larger puffers will do that. The smaller ones, not so much. Every once in a while, you'll see a small one doing that behavior, but they just get fed, or I guess full a lot faster and easier, so they're not hunting nearly as much. So here we have kind of a blurry picture, but this guy almost never moves. He's kind of a bump on a log, and so he's like, oh, he's moving, let's take a picture. This is the hairy puffer, and they get all this stubble on them. So all these crazy hairs, looks like they got a full-on beard, and depending on how long that beard is, boy or girl, and they use this back tail fin, mostly all puffers will do this, as kind of a rudder. They've got these little beady little fins up front, and they're motoring around kind of like a helicopter, and then they want to basically, in a perfect world, this fish is in a river, and it's real low to the rocks, and that current's coming at it, and it just moves its rudder to move to its prey. So it doesn't really want to even use fins, but in our tank we don't have as much current, and so he's puttering around a little bit, and in this, he's killed some snails, but usually we give them like zebra danios or something to exercise them because they just kill snails so fast. It does trim their teeth. This guy is a hardcore carnivore, will eat everything. He has to live alone. He gets to about the size of a potato. He also looks like a potato. And if you were going to keep him, You'd want some boulders down below. He's going to nestle right in between there, and he's just going to wait for some fish or anything to swim down there. If you gave him some current, that creates a biotope. But when you buy a fish like this, and you're a certified puffer nerd, because he's not going to do a whole lot. He's going to wait for something that's never coming. And anyone that ever sees that tank will be like, is there even fish in here? Yeah, you see that brown thing? That's a rock. No, it's technically a fish. I saw him move last week. But when he does hunt, it's super cool, because they're just an ambush predator, and their eyes are just working overtime. But they're not going to be that puppy dog like some of the other puffers will, where they come up to glass and they look at you and they want to interact. This guy wants you to forget about him so he can bite you in the ankle. But still a cool one, and you can still get your hands on it. I'm trying to show you only puffers you can actually put your hands on. All of these I've sold at my store. There's a bunch that that thing's the coolest thing ever. Yep, I've never seen one in the hobby ever. So, why get your hopes up on something that I've never seen on a list, and you're even wondering if they still even exist. So the Congo spotted puffer is the latest one to hit the market. It was around 20, 30 years ago. Then where it came from kind of became a war zone, and no one wanted to collect there. Now it's not so war-y there, so we can bring them in. The problem is, these guys we retail them, and there's a wait list for about $190, and this is for just a puffer that gets this big. And so much so that we try to buy them from wholesalers. We're like, we'll literally buy them all. If you have 100, we can sell them all. And they're rationing them out because they're so popular. And the reason they're so popular is you get that big Maboo puffer, that one I really like, and we'll talk about. You get all that personality in this tiny little package that any of you could keep in an aquarium at home. Doesn't have to have that many snails. It's perfect. This is a little, more in-depth shot of that tank we talked about. One of our employees has this, and they can basically live in our tap water with a little bit of crushed coral, something to raise it up a little bit. Give them some plants, and they'll greet you every morning. They'll beg you for breakfast. They'll putter around the tank. They're going to live with all your tetras, your rasboras, corredoras. They're the perfect community tank puffer. You only got to keep one. The problem is you got to take out a small loan to buy one. Everyone always asks, how do I do with other ones? I've only ever had 3 in my possession at one time, and we put them into an 18-gallon tank, and they were food aggressive, but the rest of the time, okay. I would love to see them in a bigger footprint with more of them, but I can't even put my hands on that many yet, so I can't answer that. When you look it up online, everyone, we Google everything, right? Well, you do it, and there's literally 2 sentences, and they're both on wet web media from 20 years ago, and then one of them is, does anyone ever see these anymore? And that was 10 years ago, and the other one was yeah, it's the spotted Congo puffer, So there's now no info on these guys really, and so it's still a learning thing. In fact, just recently in a Facebook group, I saw one of our local customers. They were saying theirs likes to take little bites out of plants, not decimating or anything. It just happened to be like dwarf aquarium lilies and stuff like that. So maybe they got a little destructive side, like a clown loach or something. They don't want to eat it, but maybe they just want to, I just want to chew on it. Still, the ones that we've kept and that employees are keeping, they absolutely love them, would never give them up. And that's why the wait list kind of subtly grows. Eventually people see one or they see footage of one and they go, oh, I need one of those things. That puffer lives with other stuff. So, what puffer should you get? The first thing I recommend is you get your tank. Everyone wants to do the opposite. They want to buy a puffer, and then they go, well, I'll get the tank it needs afterwards. And there's too many times that things come up, like this tank, very expensive tank. It's 6 feet long, 4 feet front to back, 2 feet tall, 360 gallons. You go, well, I'll get that, next tax return or something like that. And then your car broke down, so you couldn't buy it. Meanwhile, your puffer that was 10 inches is now 18 inches, and you're starting to struggle a little bit. And with puffers, their biggest problem is stress. When they get stressed out, they stop eating. If they don't eat for a while, they get more stressed, and they can get this downward spiral where they never come back out of it. And as hobbyists, we're going, everything was great. I've kept this guy for 2 years. It was fine. I feed him, I change his water, I feed him, I change his water. He greets me every morning, and then one morning he just wasn't. Meanwhile, he's subtly getting a little bit bigger, and at some point he's going to go, I need to be out of here, and he's going to get stressed out, and you got to have the tank ready for him well before that comes into play. And so I would buy the aquarium, or you say, oh, well, I have this aquarium, then put the puffer that fits into it too often it's, oh, well, I'm going to get a Fahaka puffer. They only get about 18 inches. I'm just putting in a 20-gallon for now, but don't worry. Next month, I've got the big tank coming that never comes through. And this is really one of those things that most of these puffers, they're going to be here this month. They're going to be here in 2 months or 6 months. And just wait to get it to then, get everything ready, research more. They're not going anywhere, but their tanks are expensive when you start playing with some of those big ones. And then, they're not an impulse buy. You really want it so that, yeah, pea puffer's beautiful, it's cute, but it shouldn't live with your bed in the 5-gallon at the office. You're just going to go, oh, dang, should have done a little more research. This guy's missing most of his fins. Now I got to talk to every coworker going, yeah, well, Frankie doesn't like, Benny. What are we going to do? So try and avoid those things. Plan first. And I know it's that broken record thing, and everyone goes, of course I do that, of course. But as you've been in the hobby for longer, myself included, you go, well, don't worry, I will make plans. I'm not like the rest of you guys. We all think we're the exception to the rule, and then those statistics exist for a reason. Like, we become that exception. Like, oh, yeah, my car did break down. I didn't have a choice, So here we have the dragon puffer, cousin to the bump on the log. This guy, lots of cool patterning, but as you can see here, laying real low. Sometimes they call him the humpback puffer. And he wants to lay between some rocks and wait for something to swim in his mouth as well. Also loves to destroy plants. If you put some greenery in there, he'll have fun destroying them, kind of a chew toy. But seasoned puffer care, in my opinion, of this should not be the first puffer you get, because it will be, that thing never moves. And so much so, the only picture I have, he's not even moving. The other one, I was excited to get a picture of him moving. These, they're only moving when they're eating, and they eat quick. They just, yoink, and they're done, and then you got to wait a few days. So if that's, if you travel a lot, this might be a great fish. If every time I'm home for 2 days, I feed it, and then I leave again, you'll think this is super active, and you'll love it. But, anyone else is going to go, that thing doesn't do anything, and he was $60, and he gets the size of a potato, and my 40-gallon breeder has one fish that always stays behind the rock or right behind the filter, so I can't even see him. That's just what they do. They like to ambush, and they don't want anyone to know who's watching them. And they got wicked good vision in general as far as puffers go, so they know you're watching them. They know it. So when it comes to meds, I always love my backwards image here. See if anyone's paying attention. I have not noticed puffers to be any more sensitive than other fish. This is a heated topic when it comes to catfish and corridoras and puffers and loaches. And in my experience, owning a store the way I treat fish, I haven't noticed with these products in particular any more sensitivity to it. Now, almost all puffers are going to be wild caught. Half of the pea puffers are wild caught, and almost every single other one except for the Fahaka puffer is going to be wild caught, which means they're going to come in riddled with internal tapeworms and parasites. And that's mostly the problem you run into when you go to buy some. And I would highly recommend, before you ever buy a puffer, ask the store to watch it eat. And if they act like that's a weird question, it's probably they don't do too much with puffers. It's really common to see rotting food in a puffer tank and very skinny puffers. And it's because they've got so many tapeworms in them, they might not even be able to eat anymore, and they don't feel good, and you're just buying a $200 death sentence at that point. So you definitely want to see it eat. And then when you get it home, you want to start working with some of this. So General Cure, I find to be a have to. It doesn't have to be General Cure, but it's got metronidazole and praziquantel, which are both going to deworm, get rid of those worms out of them. That's, in my opinion, a have to. And then so much so that I do deworming 3 times with different meds. I'll do that. I'll use levamisole. And then I used to use parasite guard soaked in food, but Tetra doesn't make it anymore. So I haven't found a third round of what I'm doing. But trust me, if you're going to grow this puffer that's this big that, people can't remember your name in the family, but they can remember that puffer because they see pictures of it, you want to get all those problems out of the way instead of going, oh, it turns out he's got really bad tapeworms and he's 5 years old. And then you're trying to use meds and you accidentally overdose or it just doesn't take it well because that stress thing we talked about. So definitely deworming, in my opinion, is non-negotiable when it comes to a puffer. We have erythromycin. This one could be negotiable. So with stuff we get in, they're all coming in wild caught. They're going to ship them like, hey, here's 30 of these things, put them in a bag. And a lot of these don't like to live together. And they're going to bite on each other a ton. They're going to have all these wounds. Erythromycin keeps that from getting infected, and we do that, and most times from the stores I visit around the country, those puffers will be kept the same way in that store, where they go, well, if we keep 10 of these humpback puffers in this 20-gallon tank, they're so aggressive, they can't kill each other, but they can still bite each other. So you're probably going to bring home some bacterial infections, and you can clear that up really easy with erythromycin. You could use other things. I just know that all of these work together, and that's a good thing because there's meds that don't work together, and you learn that real quick when they're dead an hour later. So these are tested with hundreds of thousands of fish at this point, and have worked for us. That being said, I'm just a crazy fish guy. I don't trust a word of what I say, but I make my living using these meds. And then it's real common for them to come down with kind of ick if they're being shipped in, which a lot of times you have to have these puffers special ordered into your crazy local fish store, and they go, we don't know how to take care of this thing. You got to take it out of the bag. And so you'll want to be treating for ick. And then ick-X, in my experience, also helps with some of the fungal infections. And so if they get some wounds on them, then they're getting shipped around, and they're being kept in poor water quality because their food's rotting because they're not eating. They can get these cottony growths on them. And I find that when I use all of these together, we clean them out on the inside, we get rid of their funguses, and that usually leaves behind a bacterial infection. Once we get rid of the fungus, there's an open wound, and then the erythromycin also takes care of that. So these are the meds that I use, and I spend time on it because it is very important to those puffers. Get them clean at the beginning and then move forward. And the thing to know is you might end up using these meds very often if you want the action of feeding live fish to your puffers. If you're going to feed them some zebra danios or goldfish or whatever it is, they probably should be quarantined and gotten clean, because otherwise you're just bringing flukes and tapeworms and stuff like that to your puffer, and it's only a matter of time. So with snails and stuff, I personally haven't really run into any problems. The only meds that I know that really work to get rid of really any of them, that even if they aren't common, is praziquantel, which the General Cure has. But I myself haven't run into that yet. So, take that for what you will. So the Fahaka puffer, and there's actually the person that owns this fish is in the room, and this here is the Fahaka puffer. It gets about 18 inches, and when you buy them, they'll be anywhere from an inch, 2 inches, all the way up to, wow, you're buying someone else's pet. And they're very strong puffers. So these guys are definitely ones that could definitely take a big chunk right out of your finger. They're definitely going to take down, like this one was taking down a filler crab. You can see there's a couple of legs left of that, and there's its pincher. And it shows here that, they can get pinched, and they're kind of developed to take that. But if you wanted to limit this, you can break one of the claws. I personally, I'm one of those guys against feeding live food if you don't have to. I consider it a have to with the puffers because they're so intelligent or they have such a hunting instinct. I notice a big difference if they never get live food versus if they are. And so I'm not feeding it every day, but maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks they get a live food feeding, and I try to get them into the plants, stuff like that, so they actually do have to hunt, and you get to see all those behaviors, and it keeps them active. Because a board puffer, it's kind of like when people get to be elderly. Once they become sedative, and they're not sedative, but they don't move around, and that too. Once they get sedated, once they're sitting in front of the TV and they don't do anything, you watch their health go down really fast. And, usually it's like, oh yeah, well they got a knee injury, and then it hurt too much to do anything, and then all of a sudden all these other problems piled on quickly after. I find that happens with puffers too. If they just get bored and stressed out, it's just a downhill thing real fast. And so normally on a normal predator fish, I would not say it's necessarily a necessity from the fish I've kept, but I do think it is for definitely some of these larger puffers and even some of the smaller puffers. So you can do snails and stuff like that, but as you got a fish this big, a snail this big is not necessarily it's like popcorn chicken to them at that point. So they're eating them so fast, and there's no challenge there. But when you get to watch them eat like a fiddler crab or something like that, you watch them get the hunting instinct where they're like, oh, I better size this thing up, and they'll keep like going around it, and it's just a fun thing to watch. But you can tell they're actually being mindful of it, where the snails, it's like, just shoving your head into the watermelon and just eating it, whatever lands in your mouth is good. They actually have to use some tact, and it exercises some of those skills for them. So I myself am a fan of that. And then the reason why I'm a big proponent of the fiddler crab is typically they're going to be collected from a brackish water. And so a lot of times when you bring something from salt water to freshwater or brackish to freshwater, all the potential parasites and stuff like that don't transfer over. So that's why I like it, and I've never noticed a problem with there being, are they extra salty or anything? I've never noticed a problem, but, I suppose everything in moderation. If you were to feed them that every day because you had the fiddler crab farm next door, then maybe there's a problem there, but at the once every 2 or 3 weeks, I don't find it to be a problem. Now, one question we do get is when they eat all these shells or clams, what happens when they go through them? Yep, they can just poop them right out. So whole clams, stuff like that, their digestional tract's made to do that. So don't be afraid when he ate that fiddler crab in one bite, didn't even chew it. Yep, that can happen. So these guys are great, 18 inches. This is the puffer I recommend to people when you go, well, I want a big one. Yeah, what's up? Uh-huh.
And I had a video of it. I was actually at work with my girlfriend saw it pooping out. It was like pearls. I've never seen them.
So
Like
typically in my experience, when usually I see it as white and it's pearls and it's a long kind of string of them, that's usually internal tapeworms. So that, for me at my store, that would be the telltale sign that I need to deworm this puffer more. Yeah, you really, like with my Maboo puffer, this is how you know when you're talking about puffer nerds. We're about to talk about, well, my puffer poop looks like this. So in general, it kind of looks like what they eat. So if you feed them, a bunch of red ram's horn snails, they produce almost like a hot dog that's red colored, depending on how big they are. And if they're eating clams, sometimes they come out whole. Sometimes it's just kind of a mess of stuff. But in general, you want, for lack of a better term, like formed stools that wouldn't have that. That would be, to me, a typical sign that parasites. Now, technically, it could be it had diarrhea and is very stressed out, but in puffers, it's almost always parasites. So I would definitely do a round or two of that if you haven't yet. And if you're telling me, like, well, Corey, I've done it 40 times, it's probably not that, then I'd be like, okay, it could just be this other thing, but it's almost always internal tapeworms. And the reason why you gotta do it kind of 2 or 3 times is you can't get it all in one go. So like if I bring them in the store, I treat them once, you buy it a week later, there could be stuff that's still in gestation period that the meds can't get to. So that's why you gotta follow up. And I typically do it, every month to 2 months for a while, just to really make sure I've cleaned them out and I'm seeing normal stools. And it doesn't have to be only big puffers, even small ones too. They all get it. But everyone's so afraid when it comes to a scaleless fish and meds. And that's why, I really stress, like, these are the meds that I know that I've treated thousands of puffers with at this point and never had a problem. And people always go, well, I own this. Will it work? I have no idea. So it's kind of like when you go to the doctor and he or she goes, I think you need to take this to fix your illness. And you go, well, in the medicine cabinet, I have this. It's kind of like, well, let's just listen to what he's used to working with when he sees this problem. But the Fahaka puffer, great 18-inch puffer, maybe 16, 14, somewhere in that range. It can live in maybe, if you were really diligent about it and tight on space, maybe a 75. 125 is a bit better. They are the big puffer for most people because they're going to get it to a manageable level. And 18 inches is manageable for your average person. Doesn't come with a few $100 food bill every month like a Maboo puffer might. So they are more aggressive than a Maboo puffer, but they still will be a puppy dog. They'll come and greet you. Everyone's going to fall in love with them. They won't be able to believe it's not salt water. It's got every quality you want about it. And we sell them. They run about $60. You might be able to get them as cheap as 30. It comes back to, has worming been done or not? But I really do like this puffer. It's actually one of the few puffers I haven't kept at home. I've kept them in stores a lot. I swear most of my employees own one because I talk them up so much because I think they're amazing. And I think it's only because I own 2 of the giant Maboo puffers at this point that I haven't made room for, its little cousin, basically. So when it comes to water parameters, and this kind of goes for most fish, but stability is better than perfect every time. So some of these are going to come from Thailand, some are going to come from Africa. All these puffers kind of have different water parameters, and we get crazy fanatical about them and we try to zero it in, the reality is they want something really stable. It's that stress we talked about on, we stress them out, they stop eating, they go downhill. The easiest way to stress something out is to put a little too much or not enough of some kind of aquarium buffer, whether we're bringing it down, we're bringing it up, we're changing the water. Your tap water, for most people, not everyone, I realize that, is usually more stable and easier. And when you get to some of these bigger puffers, like the Maboo puffer, we change 100 gallons of water a day on it. And so you're going to go through a lot of buffering, a lot of salts, that type of thing. And it's really easy to go, well, yeah, I thought it was, I thought I put in 9 scoops of that, and I actually put in 11 or something like that. And even though a bigger system is easier to manage, you can make a mistake, and it can go that easy and that quick. Now, the last thing about the puffers is, for water parameters, they pretty much are going to end up with the same water parameters no matter what. And it's because you're feeding them so many shelled foods. Unless you're taking out shells every day, those shells become crushed coral and end up buffering your water and bringing it to a higher alkalinity and all that stuff anyway. So being that they thrive there, and that most of you will never breed a puffer because almost no one does it. You can do it with pea puffers, and there's a few other ones that have been done, but it's difficult. But most of us want to keep one and keep it for a long time and keep it healthy. I would say keep it on tap water, maybe a little bit of crushed coral here in the Northwest. That's what I have to do because we're so acidic. But if you go to the store and you look at it, people always go like, oh, where'd you get that? Like, no, that's straight up just he's eaten that many shells. Like we didn't put crushed coral in there. It is, he's making it. So, yeah, I would maintain keeping things, on tap water roughly, same temperatures, don't get anything crazy. Once you stress them out, they start going downhill. So here's the Maboo puffer. Finally, you've been hearing me talk for a long time about Maboo puffers. We finally get to it. This is my wife who's home with our new foster puppy, so she couldn't make it. But Hank here would interact with everyone. This was the tank up at the front, and we've got lots of Java fern. There's all these rainbows, wild-caught angels. There's tons of black phantom tetras, there's rose lions, there's everything you want in a tank, and they don't eat them. It's great. You can have any fish you want pretty much that won't beat on the puffer, and it'll work out great with these Maboos, at least all the ones I've kept. Now, there's always going to be that one that's a stone cold killer, but I've yet to witness that. So, and I always tell people we're building this environment around them because they're the awesome thing. And any day he wants, he could go on a rampage and he can just bite that fish in half. He could just do it. He doesn't do it, but if I didn't feed him for 3 weeks, I wouldn't be angry when I go, oh, he ate that thing. He's hungry. They've got very powerful jaws. The Maboo puffer is the puffer in freshwater that I'm legitimately afraid of just losing straight up a knuckle. I won't hand feed him or anything like that because they are so powerful. And if you've seen videos online, which you can, or go to our store, you can feed it. He will eat through clams like the potato chips, just that easy. It's so quick, and you realize the raw power when you see it in person. It sounds like, it's like a sales pitch. When you see it, everyone is all the same, like, let me get my phone out. Someone else needs to see this, because that is blowing my mind. You can watch it online, and they never know. I didn't think it'd be so loud in person. Like, I didn't, even if you've seen it, you see it in person, you're going, this is cooler than I thought. So just know that power is there. And I've only ever lost, I think that I know of, 3 or 4 fish to my Maboo puffer, and they were all accidental. They get these big old eyes on them, and as they get bigger, they get further and further apart, and we'd feed them, and they kind of have to use one eye, and they kind of look at it going, okay, it's down there, and then they right their whole body, and they can't see it anymore because their eyes are so far apart, then they go and they eat it. The problem is, at that same time, I've had a Corridora swoop in going, hey, I want some clams, and he got a bite, and it was a mortal wound, and the Hank spit it out, because he's like, well, that's not a clam. And I had the same thing happen with a Tanganyika eel, lips for eel. It's like a $120 eel, same problem, mortal wound. He didn't die instantly, but I couldn't cure you imagine a cookie with a big old bite taken out of it. You got a fish with that same thing and keeping that from being infected, and then he's missing part of his spine. There's not a lot you can really, he could still swim, but it's not the easiest thing to take care of. So, they definitely got a wicked bite, but it's never intentional. So, I equate it, and I don't want to start any controversies, but something like a very strong dog, a German Shepherd, a Pit Bull, like even if they're the sweetest thing ever, you know that if for some reason it wanted to bite you, that's going to hurt. Like, even though you go, I've had German Shepherds, everyone does, never had a problem. Right, you'll never have a problem either, but when it does for some reason, it is wicked strong. And I'm way more afraid of the accident of like, hey, eat this clam, like there went my thumb. Like, that's what I'm afraid of, not any actual, I'm coming to hurt you. It would be purely accident with something like this, so that was a tank that's up in the front of my store, 340 gallons with this tank. It was the grow-out tank, so it's not the lifetime tank. That's just the grow-out tank. It was 32 inches front to back. Love this tank. You can see lots of rainbows, lots of action. And then this happened. We had a blowout. So the back panel of this tank let loose. It's a glass tank, a lot of pressure because it was a very tall tank. And it let loose right down here. And, it made this mess. So let me tell the story here. The tank used to sit right here, right against the wall, right? Flat against the wall. When that panel gave way, it wasn't like, what happens to most of us, oh, my aquarium's leaking. I should do that today or tomorrow. It was, it let go, and it was, the movies where it's like tidal wave throughout the entire store, and the force was so much, it moved. You got to think there's a few 100 pounds of gravel, there's really thick plate glass, there's all these rocks. It literally moved it out 3 feet, and that's where it stood once it let the water out. And you can see here, like here's wild-caught angelfish, there's rainbows everywhere, there's exotic plecos, there's these big rocks. These rocks were like this big, and they were outside of the tank. The crazy part is, Hank himself stayed in the tank. So he was in there, and you're thinking, okay, we got notification from the store cameras. Power went out because the tidal wave went through, and then it washed up, hit power, knocked the power out to the store, and that's how we found out it had happened. And at the store today, I leave the sand there so I can see like where the tidal wave went on the drywall, and there was dead bodies in sand. This story makes a lot more sense to you guys. You've been to my store, a lot of you. All the way in the bathroom, there was literally dead bodies in sand every inch of the place because the water, you don't think about it until you take a 5-gallon bucket and throw it on your living room floor, and you're like, 5 gallons of water is a lot of water. And so you can imagine 340 gallons, literally tidal wave, bodies everywhere, everything pretty much ruined. And so, we had to, everything in the store had to come out. Some of you were even at the store that day because you came in and you're like, what's going on? Why is everything in the store out on the, the front porch, so to speak? And yeah, exactly. And I used a lot of people, a lot of friends, called in a lot of favors. And, I kind of say this for the store talk, but it should have ended my business. Luckily, my neighbors on both sides are super cool because I flooded both of them as well. That's a horrible thing. It was the most stressful thing in my life. And it's the first time, and I always thought people made this up, but legitimately at that point when you're standing in the store and there's all this destruction, it was hard to think. When people say, like, I couldn't think. I always thought, you're making that up. Like, you can think. But it was the first time in my life where literally I couldn't think for like a solid 2 minutes or so. And it was I remember it so distinctly because it's so weird to me. I'd never had that feeling. I'm like, my brain couldn't, like I knew I needed to do stuff, but it couldn't like call stuff, do things, and it just would not work. And so, yeah, but there's a whole story on how you clean up $15,000 in damage and try not to go out of business, and yeah. But luckily Hank was in the tank. We grabbed him. He was out of water for almost 2 hours, so we got it, because the camera lags a little bit when the power is lost. And we were already on the way, and power goes out in Edmonds. There's windstorms. You're going, yeah. And we were going to be at the store at 8 a.m. already, so we're going to go to the wholesalers. And it made sense, like, okay, we'll get there. And then my employee texted me, he's like, oh, you got to get here, like, it's bad. And, he didn't even say, like, oh, the tank gave loose or anything like that. It's like you get the most cryptic message ever, and so you're assuming the worst, and then it was, like, worse than what I could really expect, so that's even worse, So I get there, and he's literally, like, got a net, and he's getting him, and we just flop him in there, and he looks like that for the next 12 hours or so. He just, meanwhile, we're just like, what do you do? We're trying to save the other businesses and do whatever we can. But he makes a recovery, and right down here is my little favorite thing. People were making him cards, kids and stuff, like, because this puffer, like I said, you will love this puffer. Your entire family will love your puffers. This puffer, more people knew that puffer than will ever know me. And he puffed up. I was rounding the corner working, and I pull out my cell phone and I get it. This is on the deflate because they get huge, like a basketball. I was able to get it. And but he's stressed out. This is a 75-gallon tank he's in, and his mouth is touching that side, and right here is the 24-inch mark, and you can see his tail is not shy of that. So he's stressed out, and he's in a tight tank, but as we already established, moving puffers is hard, and it's stressful on him, and he seemed to be recovering in here, and I don't want to chance anything, and this was like a couple of days later or something like that. And in this tank, we couldn't feed him as much as he wanted because he goes to the bathroom, ammonia goes through the roof, even though we're on auto water change and we're changing tons of water, 75 gallons, can't handle the load. And so we lost quite a few neon tetras. He just would, he would snack when hungry. And I can't fault him for that. So, that's a different talk and stuff like that. But, Mabu puffers, they are like owning a dog. It will be devastating when you lose it, I cried like a baby, no joke. When I lost this fish, cried like a baby, and I didn't lose it from this. He lived through all this, lived like another year, and then he ended up having a disease that there's no known cure for. We had it analyzed, nothing we can do. The consensus is when it gets into the salmon farm, you sterilize, the few $1 million facility. There is no cure. But they were able, when we had the necropsy done, he was a boy, so that's good. There's no way to sex Mabu puffers any other way, so you kind of go, I think you're a Mary, or I think you're a Hank, or whatever. And he was a boy, and he was clean for everything we could have treated him for, except they're all wild caught, and they're going to come in with stuff that we don't have cures for, and that's part of the price of keeping an exotic animal like this. We did rebuild, though. This is that tank you saw me laying in. So now this is front to back, just to kind of give you a proportion. So now that tank blew open, I had to make a new tank for Hank. And because that other tank would only been about this wide front to back, we went, thinking it's going to be a forever tank. We got him a giant tank. Well, I say giant. He still would maybe need bigger, and we were willing to go that. But this just gives you, something in this range with the stand was about 7,000, maybe 7,500 for just tank and stand retail. So that's where you kind of like, really, you want to own the tank? It's like you can get a car, you can get this. And so, you really want to be committed if that's what you're going to do, because he's still got a giant food bill. They might eat 8 ounces of food a day, and you got to feed them clams on the half shell. And so you might be feeding $200 or $300 worth of food every month. Not uncommon to a Great Dane or something like that, a big dog, but it's a commitment. It's not just your normal thing. It's okay, this is a lifelong pet. And then today you can still come in and you can feed Murphy. This is Murphy. Murphy has gotten a bit bigger from this picture. And you see, kids love to come in and feed it. That's why it had that port right there, so you can drop in the clams. If you wear a Aquarium Co-op t-shirt in, you can always feed every time you wear the shirt in, which is great. And people bring their whole family in. You can see what I say. Someone feeds it, and someone else goes, oh my God, I got to record this. So they instantly pulled their camera out going, oh my God, look at this. And it's just a really fun event. And, I would say we sold quite a few Mabu puffers and stuff like that because people get to see one in person. In a picture online, it's a puffer, but in person it's kind of like you go to your friend's house and they have that dog that knows 10,000 tricks and can do everything, and it's an agility trainer and it does all the cool things. You're like, I should have a dog. And you realize it took a lot of work and stuff like that. And but yeah, I genuinely love puffers, and I told you I was going to sneak some guppies in. He lives with a horde of guppies in this tank. He doesn't bother them. The guppies don't bother it. They just feed on the hot dog or whatever is served up to them from Murphy here each day. You kind of want something in the fish that breaks that down. Normally I'd use snails or shrimp, but he eats them. But oddly enough, Murphy, I learned a new technique. We have a bunch of orange neo shrimp in here. The plants are so dense, we have this giant colony. As long as they don't come out in the other giant section of the tank, they can live freely. So again, it's like, well, now you have two situations with puffers with shrimp, and it's like, oh, well, yes, but these are exceptions to the rules. I put the shrimp in there for him to eat, not make me look bad, but, I would never, he gets to do what he wants. I do a lot of things. I work very hard just to make sure Murphy can have a good life. And because I'm not at the store nearly as much as I was, I now have a Mabu puffer that's about this big at home named Ladybird, because I can't live my life without kind of interacting with one every day. He still knows me when I walk in. He'll, swim towards you. He watches. Their eyesight's so good, they watch the door open at the front of the store. It's kind of like I had to leave my best friend or my dog at the store. 'Cause you can't take them home. People will be devastated. So it's like, well, I got to get another dog then. I'm a dog guy. I'm a puffer guy. So, and all the employees, I'm sure, they love to feed it. But then I could see them getting, maybe annoyed where they're like, oh, another person to feed it. But it brings so much joy. And I bring more people into freshwater because exotic things exist. They're so used to maybe a PetSmart or a Petco and not this giant animal with all these live plants and stuff like that. And he lives with other fish. I thought they were aggressive. And the hardest part for the employees, I think, is every time someone sees it for the first time, you have to hear about, I was in Hawaii once and we snorkeled and we saw puffers. Like everyone just assumes it's the same one. No, I saw that one. Literally that one. It's like, no, wasn't in the ocean, but close, yeah. So I'm sure there's lots more questions about specific puffers, specific issues, things like that. You can always email us at store@aquariumcoop.com. We'll do a Q&A right here. And, we can get into more nerdy things. We can diagnose puffer poop. We can just talk about, hey, what about this, river, red spotted puffer that you didn't show that no one can get their hands on? We can talk about that too. So did anyone have a question or think about getting crazy into the puffer world? I think we got a mic.
How long do each of the puffers live, and how long did you have Hank?
So I had Hank for about 5 years before he passed away, and part of the enigma is there's not many people that have kept like a Mabu puffer long-term and Fahaka puffers long-term. So it's kind of like clown loaches. If you say, well, how long does a clown loach live? Some people might say like 10 years, and the next person goes, well, I've had mine for 30. I think we kill them with power outages and mistakes and stuff like that well before we'll ever run into their lifespan. And even at zoos and stuff like that, or aquariums, we're seeing upwards of 25 years maybe is what they report, but then they go, well, I'm not sure if that was the original or it's the other one. And so the general rule of thumb, I tell people with the larger puffers, you're kind of getting into like a dog commitment, maybe 12 years, 15 years, 20 years, depending on the genetics of that puffer. Did it get any wild-caught things that are incurable? On a lot of that smaller stuff, I would say 7 to 10 years. And the problem is because they're all wild-caught, when you get an Amazon puffer that's this big, he's either 6 months old, 6 years old, 16 years old. Like, your guess is as good as anyone. So when someone says, well, I kept it for 5 years and then it died, they only lived 5 years, we don't know where they started from. And so it makes it really difficult. And the puffer community is there, but no one's really keeping lots of puffers long-term because they are such high-maintenance pets. Life usually intervenes. A job move, kids, something crops up that, makes it run into a problem. Steve.
You were talking about freshwater puffers, and but with when we go to treat for parasites, one thing we like to do is use salt.
Yep.
And it's been my experience that most of the puffers, even freshwater puffers, have a pretty good tolerance for salt. Are there any that you would worry about not having a good tolerance for salt?
No, I've had pretty good luck with salt on most of them. I leave it out of my talk because it's like one of the most highly controversial topics. I actually think salt is magical for treating most fish. There are some fish that are crazy sensitive to it. Puffers, in my experience, are not. They can tolerate quite a bit. But then some people start relying on salt. Like, oh, I don't have to worry about it. I put some salt in there. I'm keeping it a little bit brackish or whatever. And in my experience, the salt, people remember that like, oh, I have salt. That'll be the thing. My puffers will be fine, but it's not going to deworm them. So it will fight off the bacterial infections, fungal infections, external parasites, depending on what salinity. And it is a very useful tool. And I would use it if you know that it's not the only tool you should be using, So it is useful, but I use it as high as 1 tablespoon per gallon of water, which is relatively high, and that will get rid of things like velvet and stuff like that. But then as far as like ick, you could use it like 1 per 3 gallons. And for me, when it comes to treating puffers, every one of them is different because like, okay, this thing is so sunken in, hasn't eaten for months, and it's this close to death. I really got to be careful here. And some you'll never be able to save. They're so pinched in, they'll never eat again. And there's some that's pretty robust, and you go, oh, you could throw almost anything at that, and it would do just fine. But yeah, in general, salt can do good things, I would say.
Do the smaller puffers
What do you think the good tank size for the spotted Congo puffer would be?
Spotted Congo puffer, I really like a 40 breeder. I'm a guy that tends to want tanks that are bigger than you have to have. I think if we were, if it's Corey in a studio apartment and he's not going to give up his puffers no matter what, I would shoehorn one into like a 25-gallon cube or a 29 and just be like ultra vigilant about those water changes and be fanatical. But the other side of me goes, well, let's give him more footprint in a 40 breeder. I can be a little more lazy. I'm going to be able to put more plants into it, and it's going to help me make an ecosystem that will keep this puffer a lot easier. But I think when people ask, like, what size fish to what size tank, it really depends on your skill level as a hobbyist. If you, if Steve was to do it, he might be going, well, I can keep him in there for, 20-gallon tank for indefinitely, and he has the extra eye to see illness or see things, and I've got that in my own store. I can see, like, my employees won't see him, like, no, there's something wrong with this tank. I can see it. Neon tetras don't school that way, and most people just go, yeah, they're just schooling, but they're schooling in a different way. And so I would say give yourself room for error. If we know, okay, well, a 5 gallon's the smallest we can keep a pea puffer in, like, well, why not go 10 or a 12-gallon or that nice Fluval, Flex 15 or, anything that gives you a little bit more breathing room so that when Christmas hits and there's a snowstorm and your relatives are in town and there's all these things going wrong, you didn't miss your, fourth water change on the week and then stuff's starting to get stressed out. So let's move,
Any tips on puffer teeth trimming?
So puffer teeth trimming, my biggest tip is if you've done it correctly and fed insane amounts of shelled foods, hopefully we never have to experience that. The next part is watch a ton of videos, build up the courage, because this is like, it's essentially like asking me, like, okay, I need you to do the surgery on your own dog today. It's going to be emotional. You're not going to want to do it. The problem is there's no vet that's going to do it for you either. You can call around and it's like, well, yeah, there's the exotic pet specialist, but they don't really do fish, They don't really know what they're doing. And so your best hope is that you can get someone to prescribe you MS-222, which is a sedative for fish, and you got to learn a bunch about it. And you also have to, when you put that in the water, it's going to sedate the fish, but it's also going to radically change the pH. So you're going to use something like baking soda to counteract that. You're going to put them under for as short a time as possible. Then you're going to use like some cuticle clippers or fingernail clippers, something that they have the consistency of that mostly. And you're going to trim them down. And the big thing is no one really knows how much. It's like, do you do a lot? Do you only do a little? You don't want to go so much that you actually hurt them. You don't want to have to do that every 2 weeks either. So you kind of just go, all right, I've watched all these videos. This is what these people did. And I'm going to make that attempt also. And the goal would be that hopefully you've bought a puffer that wasn't having that problem, and then you've continued to give it the diet that it wants, and it doesn't have that problem. But there are some that are like, well, I will never eat a snail. Like there's still, it's like owning a dog. You're like, I've tried 47 different dog foods. It still won't eat them, And it's like there's always allergies. There's all these things that, crazy things are like 1 in a million chance, and we all end up being that 1 in a million chance. So, luckily, my big puffers and all the puffers I have really haven't had that problem much. The one time we had an employee try it, we used clove oil, and it didn't work out too well, even though everyone else is using it. And that's why I've taken courses with Dr. Tim Miller-Morgan. That's down in Oregon. There's a university for tropical fish, like our tropical fish, not just crazy saltwater stuff like that, but he actually does like legitimate aquarium stuff. And so I took a class on doing koi and stuff like that. And so that's who I'd be looking for if I need to do that. That being said, everyone always asks me, and I always say I don't want to do it because I don't want to be the guy that says, I just killed your dog, and I don't want to charge for it. And, I can give you all the tools I can of the same advice, but it's not a well-documented thing. It's kind of experimental surgery at this point. No one's got, you think you got it. You go and you read on the puffer and it says do this, and then you find 40 other people that all tried that exact thing and they all killed the puffer. And then you see like, well, this person did this and it's different, and that worked. And then you see, well, they did that and it didn't work. And so I think it gets a little bit difficult when you start playing with different pHs and stuff like that, and you're using these sedatives, and it's like, well, how long was it under? Because, they don't really give times. It's like, well, when it rolls over, then you've got some time to do something. And it's a lot of mystery. And so the best thing is prevention. And then when you get one that just you can't prevent, or you're already getting it, you just kind of got to go, well, it's time for me to learn and hopefully improve my skill set and pass along my knowledge to other people. And so that when they're researching all these videos and all these forums, they can go, well, that person did this, 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 and this, and I was about to do that, and 5 other people did that, and they all didn't work. I'm going to avoid that method. So it's an unfortunate place to be. Yes?
Do even the smaller puffers have problems with like tapeworms and a lot of the other bacteria stuff?
Not so much the bacterial infections, I find, mostly because they're not as aggressive with each other. But yes, the tapeworms, so in my opinion, every fish should be dewormed just because they usually hit a wholesaler, and one week it might be pea puffers, the next week it's the wild-caught angels, the next week it's wild-caught something else, and then it's tank-bred this. And so it's kind of a soup of everything all around, and it's common for them to pick it up. And then the other half, they are wild-caught. And so one of the best things you could do is just look at the pea puffers in the store before you buy them. Do they have nice bellies? And, you know, if you really want to be fanatical, check them out a few times. Try to check them out right when they open the store so you know they haven't eaten that day. And if they still have nice abdomen shape and everything, they probably don't have internal tapeworms that are causing them to lose weight. Now, they could have eggs inside them. They could have very small ones. I myself like to start from a blank slate, and I treat it like maybe dogs are in, you know, our lives. If you have no history on a dog, you say, like, well, we should get these vaccinations and stuff like that because we don't know a history. And if you don't know the history, but hopefully you have a local store and you can just ask them, like, hey, have you dewormed this thing? Have you done this? And they go, oh, yeah, we totally have, and it's ready to go, and it looks good, and you watched it eat, and you've got a new great pet. So I would say I would, and I do treat all the ones that come into my store because it doesn't cost a lot of money to treat them, and it can really plague them long term. So, Dean.
Okay, so with puffers like Hank or Murphy,
Mhm.
large ones,
Yeah, the Mabu.
you got a lot of water.
Mhm.
After you put them through your quarantine process, you've dewormed them and everything,
Yep.
do you go back and prophylactically treat them every so often? And that would be kind of expensive. wouldn't
I myself don't do that. I know in like the discus world, and there's a lot of these worlds where, yes, I try to do everything in my power to curb the amount that we could introduce things into that system. So, for instance, like when we want to add guppies, let's say, we quarantine them for 3 or 4 months, and we put them through insane amounts of meds because we don't want a chance that they are going to get the puffer sick, and so much so that you know, the water only ever goes through there once. So we've got goldfish totes underneath our puffer tank at the store. The water comes from the puffer tank down to there and then out of the system. It's never recirculated. You know, we rinse nets in between. We do everything we can at a reasonable level. That being said, if I was to notice, let's say, some stringy poop or something like that, I would treat it. If it was in my tank at the store, I would consider maybe lowering it a half so I used less meds. But if it was at 24 inches already and I thought that would bring stress, I would probably just bite the bullet and pay the money to do it, because even if I got rid of the parasites, but now I put it in that downward spiral if I won't eat or anything. And I think that's one of the important things, is really interacting with your fish a lot. So I use dogs a lot because I just really think they are like dogs. When your dog gets sick in a family, most people go, hey, something's not right with that dog today, just feeling under the weather. Most people, we don't notice that with our fish. We notice like, oh, I see the wound, or I see the spots, and usually we had a heads up of 3, 4, 5, 6 days well before the signs we can see are happening. And if you're really watching, you go, huh, it didn't come up like it normally comes up to the glass, or hey, it didn't do this, or it always eats 6 clams, and today it only ate 2, and the next day it only ate 2. It's already telling you the story. And so if we can really be interactive with these fish, we can see a lot of things coming on, and we can treat it before, because I'd much rather deworm a fish that's eating well than wait till it stops eating and then wait a week and it's still not eating, then put the medicine in. So, any other questions? Well, hopefully you all buy some puffers appropriately sized for your tanks after you've done research, of course.